Thank you, Bonnie. The theme for this month is divining divine will. And I have to say that the speakers so far this month, Reverend Bonnie and Peggy Shin, Randy Granger, have done a really good job of exploring that theme. They haven't left much on the table for me, but I will do my best. When Peggy was here, she said that the quality of our lives is proportional to the quality of the questions that we ask. And so I thought, well, what are some questions that have not yet been asked about divining divine will? And the first question that comes to mind is, what do we mean by divine will? And how do we know there is one, after all? Well, you might think, well, the Bible tells us that there's a divine will. But not so much, not really. I have an electronic copy of the King James Bible, and so you can do a search there. I searched for God's will, I searched for the Lord's will, 0 times. Thy will is probably the one that we come to, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and thy will shows up 4 times in the entire Bible. Will of the Lord, will of God, will of the Lord, 0 times. Will of God, 0 times in the Hebrew Bible, and once in one gospel, once in the book of Acts, and maybe about a dozen times scattered throughout the letters of Paul. On the other hand, I did look for the eyes of the Lord, and in the book of Genesis alone, it shows up over 50 times. And we know that God doesn't really have eyes in any human sense, and so perhaps doesn't really have a will in any human sense. So what do we mean by the will of God, or divine will? Well, I went to Ernest Holmes, a dictionary of New Thought terms. Ernest Holmes, the founder of religious science. And under that phrase, thy will be done, he has this: since the will of God and the nature of God are identical, thy will be done means I recognize the nature of reality and permit it to operate in my experience. I accept it. So the will of God is the nature of God, which is the nature of reality. It's what's going on. It's what is. So let's look at that. What is? Well, let's start with the basics. Gravity. Gravity's been going on for like 14 billion years. Chances are, if there's a divine will, that's part of it. Earth life on Earth, I don't know about anywhere else, but life on Earth, about 3.5 billion years, so good chance that that's covered by, and of course, chocolate. It goes without saying. So divining divine will, how do we go about divining it, aside from looking at the obvious? Well, people have, as the speakers prior in this month have said, people have used various tools: divining rods, tarot cards, tea leaves, casting runes. In the Bible, there's actually something similar to casting runes. The high priest would cast what are called Urim and Thummim, which nobody knows exactly what they were, but apparently something like casting runes to discern the will of God. And I think that all these different tools have behind it a notion that has come up in here this year. The notion, they wouldn't use this term, of course, of a holographic universe, that anything in the universe enfolds and encodes something about the entire universe. And so if you cast the runes or look at the tea leaves and can somehow break the code of what these leaves are saying or what these runes are saying, then there's something about that encodes something else in the universe that you're looking at, looking for. Now, another question that arises is, okay, so let's say you divine the divine will. Why? What do you want to do? What are you going to do about it? Now, in a sense, you're not going to do anything about it, right? It's what is going on. It is what is happening. There's nothing you can do about it. That's what Ernest Holmes says, I accept it. You can do that. You can accept it. But I think that when we're trying to divine the divine will in terms of these tea leaves and tarot cards and so on, what we're looking for is some sort of guidance. What shall I do? What do I want to do? What does the universe, what job does the universe have for me? Now, nowadays, if we look at, let's say, a restaurant or a store in the mall that has a job opening, they'll have a sign out, help wanted. But in former times, they were a little bit more formal. And the signs would say, position available, inquire within. Some of you get it? Again, the speakers, all the other speakers so far this month have talked about, yes, inquire within. Go within, ask yourself what the divine will is. But the question then comes up, well, how do I know that it's the divine will and not just my little will? In a sense, it's a non-question again, because remember all that one with the whole stuff that we continually go back to? You know, the divine will is my will. My will, you know, God and I are one. The divine and I are one. The thing itself is showing up as me. So in a sense, that's a non-question, but in a sense, it's like, well, maybe it's just what's on the top of my mind right now. This whatever it is I want, and it's not really my true will, if you will. So some of these tools can be used for that. The divining rods, using a pendulum. Some people use muscle testing. It's not clear. I know that there are books and there are speakers out there that say you can do muscle testing to see some sort of objective truth. That hasn't really been borne out by other experiments, but maybe we can do an experiment. This is religious science. Maybe we can do an experiment sometime to see how that works. But at least we can say that something like muscle testing or a pendulum can help you find out what's going on inside you that you may not be consciously in touch with. Your other than conscious mind may communicate with you through those means. So that's one way. But another way is, again, look around. Divine will is what's going on in your life. Right now, I would say the divine will for each and all of us here is to be in Las Cruces. It's where we are. It's what's going on. It's divine will. Unless you're looking on YouTube and you're somewhere else, in which case fill that in. But otherwise, yeah, that's divine will. It's what's going on in your life. Really. Well, some of that's good, and some of that maybe not so much. What's going on? I know a number of people here keep what they call gratitude lists. And gratitude list is all the stuff that's going on in your life that you're grateful for. So that's divine will. I've said in the past that I prefer the term appreciation, because appreciation, to me, to appreciate something is this kind of impersonal gratitude. You're not grateful to someone, you're grateful for something. So I like it for that reason. Also, at least in our culture, I think in most cultures, to be grateful means to be in debt, to owe, right? I owe you one, much obliged. And you don't want this gratitude list to be a burden. It's not a burden list, it's a gratitude list. And so I like the term appreciation. And I like it for one other reason as well. Think about a house appreciating or a collectible appreciating. To appreciate is to increase in value. And so when we consciously appreciate even the things that aren't on the gratitude, I appreciate that I have a toothbrush. I appreciate my shoes. I don't really put those things on a gratitude list, but if I consciously appreciate them, I increase their value in my life. So that's kind of why I prefer appreciation. So there's these things that are on your gratitude list, the things that, your friends, your family, things like that. There are the things that maybe you can put on a separate appreciation list, or just think about it as you go about your day. As you brush your teeth, appreciate your toothbrush. As you have your coffee, appreciate that. And then there's the other things, the things that would go on the bummer list, the downer list. The things that, when they're in your life, it's like, I'd rather not, thank you. But they're there. But again, we go back to Ernest Holmes, I accept it. All of Eckhart Tolle's teachings are about not rejecting the now, because first of all, you can't. But also, the now is what is. How do you reject that? How do you say no to it? Now today, as it turns out, is a Jewish holiday. It's not one of the more well-known ones. It's called Tisha B'Av, which simply is the date in the Hebrew calendar, the 9th day of the month of Av. And it is the date on which both the first and the second temples were destroyed. Hundreds of years apart, but they were both destroyed on the same date, the 9th day of the month of Av. And the text that is read in temples and synagogues for this holiday is the Book of Lamentations. How many have you read the Book of Lamentations recently? Yeah. How many of us have thought at some time in our life we could write a Book of Lamentations? A lot more hands go up. Yeah. Yeah. We have that bummer list. For me, probably at the top of that bummer list, I think most of you know that for many years now I've had chronic fatigue syndrome. For over 17 years now. Sometimes a little better, sometimes a little worse. Sometimes I've fought against it, sometimes I've given up about it, cycled one way or the other, depending. Tried many, many kinds of treatment, both medical and otherwise. There was one time early on when I was taking over 50 pills a day to try and alleviate the symptoms. And as I say, sometimes I struggle and I fight, sometimes I give up. My Book of Lamentations, it's been hard. Sometimes you see me up here and I'm a bit more active. I'll walk around, I'll stand up more. Sometimes it's one of those days when I'll be using the stool and sitting for most of the time. But regardless, when you see me here on Sundays, Sunday morning, whether I'm up here or sitting out there, what you don't see is Sunday afternoons, which usually I'm in bed most of Sunday afternoon, because Sunday morning just uses up all the energy. But I come anyway because it's worth it to me. I don't know if that's one of the sayings you'd like to have on it, come because it's worth it to me. It's a little brief. But it is. One Bible verse that I've heard quoted a lot, and not quite, I know that next month the theme is no mistakes, but there are misinterpretations. And one of the Bible verses that I hear a lot is, "Be still and know that I'm God," which is part of a verse or part of a sentence. The "be still" part I have heard interpreted as meaning still your mind, quiet your mind, and as though it were some sort of Eastern meditation. And it comes from the book of Psalms, and while the book of Psalms is an Eastern text, it's Middle Eastern, it's not Far Eastern. And the word that is translated in the King James as "be still" actually comes from a root meaning be weak, be slack, let go, which with my chronic fatigue I can appreciate, I can relate to that. To be weak, to more modern translations will say, instead of "be still," let go, cease struggling, cease striving. The idea of surrender has come up in a number of the messages this month. And I think that when we think about surrender, we've all seen enough TV shows, we've all seen enough movies to know what surrender means. It means, forgive me, Skip, be still. Sorry. All right, Larry, you're surrounded. Throw down your weapons and come out with your hands up. I'm done with that now, Skip. And that's not something you want to do. What does surrender mean? As I say, all these years that I've had this chronic fatigue, it's been a cycle back and forth of struggling and striving, rather than cease struggling, cease striving, or giving up. And I think the trick to learn is to surrender without giving up. And that sounds like it's some sort of, like something that you have to figure out how to do. It's how do you surrender without giving up? Now, I've given a number of messages here over the years. I've done some talks Wednesday mornings at the temple in their breakfast, and I've been encouraged by the responses that I've gotten. And I know, to the extent that one can know, that I have more to give than just that. And in the past, I've tried to pursue some sort of enterprise where I'd do more and start off at a time when I have a lot of energy and a lot of enthusiasm for it, and I'll do some work toward it, and then the chronic fatigue will hit, and I'm in bed 2 or 3 days, or maybe the brain fog part of it will hit where I can't really think straight for a while, and then the giving up comes in. And so it's that cycle back and forth. And what I have to learn is how to surrender to, I've had this chronic fatigue for 17 years now. I've tried all kinds of treatments. And if one comes up that will get rid of it, that'll go on my gratitude list, not having the chronic fatigue anymore, but I don't count on it. I used to count on it at some point going away. And I can't count on that anymore. I have to surrender to the idea that maybe it's not going to go away, but not to give up. To find some path where I can continue to find ways to give more while the chronic fatigue is going on. What's going on is divine will, to have that enthusiasm, to surrender and still do the work. And presumably, when I'm saying this, it's not just talking about me, that we all have, as we've noted, our Book of Lamentations, the bummer list, and to somehow surrender and not give up. So let's reframe that thing about surrender that I said earlier. All right, you're surrounded by inexorable divine law and by infinite divine love. Throw down your weapons. There's no way you can fight, and there's no reason to fight. And come out. Don't hide under a bushel, with your hands raised to receive the good that is still coming to you. And so it is.